Our second panel is we ended on a bit of a high note there with you, Tom. Thanks so much for telling us about the elated workers with a wheelbarrow of money. As you heard from Gil and Comrade Sharon, that isn't always the way the just transition goes. But we are going to hear some examples now of how just transition or how discussions about transition can go when they generally are going well. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Hans Christian Gabrielsen, who's the president of the Norwegian Trade Union Confederation. Hans Christian represents nearly 1 million workers. Norway is a small country, folks, so this is a big thing, about 5 million people. In the labor paradise of Norway, we have 50% union density about, which we think is too low. Right? Yeah, this is going to laugh from the friends in U.S. labor. So Hans Christian was elected the new Secretary General at the Congress in 2017. He comes from the pulp and paper industry from Fengelsforbundet and has been involved, amongst other things, in collective bargaining agreements on wood processing, construction, and the glass industry. And he's also involved, of course, in the Labour Party. In Norway, our Labour Party is, like the NDP, connected to the union movement. And he's a member of the National Committee of the Norwegian Labour Party, which will come into power again soon. We hope. There we go. Okay, so Hans Christian, in Norway, so as coming from the US and working in Norway in Statoil, I was really struck by the model of industrial relations. So in Norway, you have a long tradition of tripartite cooperation and social dialogue. You could also explain maybe for some of the sisters and brothers from the US labor movement what that involves. How do you bring climate issues and just transition into this cooperation? And what's the policy of Norwegian unions on the Paris Agreement and just transition?
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here together with you here today. I think to understand the Norwegian cooperation model, the Norwegian model as we call it, you need to think that this is a model going way, way back. For many, many years, from the early 1930s. We have a situation in Norway that we have a very strong cooperation between the labor movement and the employers, but also the government. And this tripartite cooperation is the foundation of the Norwegian model, if you like. And there are three pillars of the Norwegian or the Nordic model, if you like. It is economic governance, that you have, you pay your tax, and it's the social security network, taking care of you. And the public welfare is the second pillar. And the third and perhaps most important pillar is, organized work. You have an organized working life. And it's true, yes, that we're not happy with 50%. The Swedes have more than us. We don't like that. So it's not a good thing. So we keep working to increase the union density. That's one of our priority. But to have organized work, you need strong and responsible trade unions, and you need strong and responsible employers, organizations, and you need another crucial thing, and that's coordinated wage setting. I understand this, can be a little strange to some of you, but in Norway, we finished the collective bargaining round in, when was it? April this year. And when we do that, we set the level this year for like 2.4%. Then we have set the mark for the rest of the society. So everybody else will clock in, approximately on the same figure. This means that in crisis, For instance, after the financial crisis or in the oil crisis, the government can, look to the parties in the work life, the trade unions and the employers, to seek help, and we can take responsibility, and we can commit the whole working life. So it's much easier for the government to recover after such crisis like the financial crisis and the oil crisis. So this is a key issue to understand the Nordic model. But to establish that, you need one more basic fact, and that is trust. Trust is a beautiful word in Norwegian. It doesn't work the same way in English. In Norwegian, the word is called tillit. You can write it both ways, and it goes both ways, but only in Norwegian. Trust isn't the same thing in English. But trust is key, because you need trust when you pay your taxes, that you get your education and your health service and what have you, and you need trust when it comes to the welfare state and also trust in the unions. So Norwegians or the Nordic countries have a high level of trust in the institution, in the unions, in the government, even in politicians. You have quite high degree of trust. So this is the background you need to understand when I'm talking about how we use the tripartite negotiations. For instance, when it comes to the climate change. And climate issues are clearly one of the issues that we can cooperate well on. And we have joined forces with the employer side in doing several initiatives. We have several workplace projects together to promote participations on climate issues and workplace measures. And we have several different initiatives that we're doing together with the employers. So is it all well? Are we finished? Are we done? No, not far from it. Far from it. Of course, there are areas where the government doesn't perform as well as we would like. For instance, when it comes to just transition as such, we have not succeeded in convincing the Norwegian government to establish a just transition center, council, or a task force at the national level. And they also voted down our proposal about the government having to report to Parliament on social dialogue under the Norwegian Climate Act. So we still have things to improve. And another thing we need to improve is how we're gonna, tackle the necessity of lifelong learning when it comes to climate change. Skill training, reskilling. So this is one of the key issues. But we have worked with the city of Oslo and the governing mayor there. So Samantha, we will have a surprise for you tomorrow. Where we're gonna, okay, since it's only us, okay, and you promise not to tell. Well, yes, I trust you. We will make a pledge tomorrow for establishing an Oslo model for just transition at the McGowan Center, and we will establish just transition. It's difficult to talk English, and it's 10 o'clock in Norwegian time in PM. So we're going to establish a just transition center, a task force. So it's going to be a key element in this. So I'm really looking forward to that, and looking forward to tomorrow. But first of all, I'm really excited about being here together with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hans Christian. And we're looking forward to the sort of surprise tomorrow, eh? I won't tell anyone, I promise. Okay, Irene. So let me welcome our sister Irene Lanzinger, who is the president of the BC Federation of Labor. The BC Fed represents more than 500,000 working people from affiliated unions across all sectors of the economy. Irene is the first female president of the BC Fed, and she has a, woo! She has a long history as a strong leader in the labor movement and is deeply committed to advancing equality, protecting vulnerable workers, and strengthening workplace safety. And of course, Irene also has worked internationally, joining solidarity declarations in Namibia and across Latin America. So Irene, we worked together, or you did all the work, you and the union sisters did all the work, but to get the city of Vancouver to include just transition in setting its climate plans and delivering them. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, Hans Christian, but actually Vancouver was first. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that process, and also what is it going to mean now for working people in Vancouver that the city is doing this?
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and I have to say Sam deserves as much credit for this as I do, to tell you the truth, because she pushed us to this Just Transition Summit in April, which was a kind of key to leading Vancouver to this place. And she pushed us to get commitments from the city as well. So, that was a plot on her part, but it worked. And I will also talk a little bit about the background in Vancouver, because I think it's important. And while Vancouver is not quite Norway, it is similar in some respects that Vancouver is a highly unionized environment. And virtually everybody who works for the city of Vancouver is unionized, who isn't management. Very few jobs are contracted out. Vancouver has the highest level of in-house work done by city employees of any city in North America. So it is a very unionized environment, and while we've had city governments that have been from both the left and the right, predominantly they have been from the left, and when the right has been in power in Vancouver, they haven't undone that. I think it just became unacceptable to undo that. So that's the context in which Vancouver began a greenest city plan and then a renewable city action plan. And they're not only highly unionized, but they also, at least in the last 10 years under the current city administration, have been very committed to living wages. They were the first living wage employer in British Columbia. So no one in Vancouver works for under $21 an hour, even if it is a contracted out service. So, and they're also very active on poverty reduction and housing. And they're not perfect, but they are a very good administration and very much in the social justice realm. And I honestly think that they were good on the environmental side with their greenest city plan. They were good on the labor side, but it really took them until about 2 years ago to put those pieces together and to understand that their progressive labor practices and their progressive attitudes towards climate change should be married together. And so they did engage with labor. They engaged with the BC Fed. They engaged with a coalition that we have called Green Jobs BC, which is a coalition of the labor movement and environmental groups. They engaged with the Vancouver District Labor Council, and they came up with two pieces. And one of those pieces is the establishment of a task force, a Just Transition Task Force, to evaluate their Renewable Cities Action Plan through the lens of equitable access and just transition. So that is not only how jobs are going to change and how people are going to be impacted by that, which is what we talk about as just transition, but what is the impact in terms of poverty reduction, in terms of housing affordability, and in terms of that larger goal of making Vancouver a livable city. And of course, as you will probably know, housing affordability is impossible nut to crack in Vancouver. I mean, we just, nobody lives in a house less than $1 million in Vancouver. You own a house in Vancouver, you are a millionaire or more, probably more than a millionaire. So, you know, rental housing, they're building some social housing, all that. I won't go into the housing thing, but the Just Transition Task Force that they have is not only about jobs, but about equitable access, which I think is very important. The second thing that they did was to look at this issue of just transition through the lens of business models of businesses who operate in Vancouver, and how those models and businesses will be impacted by their Renewable City Action Plan, and how they can assist. So they're looking at how they can assist businesses in Vancouver to undergo just transition when their Renewable City Action Plan affects those businesses. So I think that's an important part of it. They're not only looking at their own jobs, they're looking at the jobs of businesses that operate in Vancouver. So when we had this Just Transition forum in Vancouver in April of 2018, and they were sort of going down those roads already, but as a result of that Just Transition forum in 2018, they have also adopted a jobs target to accompany their carbon pollution targets and their renewable energy targets. So not only will they have targets around emissions reductions and renewable energy, they'll have targets around producing good green jobs as a result of their climate action. I won't go into, there's all kinds of pieces, and one of the things that they hold up as a shining example of their work with unions and the labor movement is their zero emission building plan, which is, you know, got training at the BC Institute of Technology, collaboration with builders, passive housing training that they have helped fund at BCIT. So they've done, you know, that's one example of a way that they've engaged manufacturers, trades, businesses, and it's a long-term plan so people can plan for the skills and technology that will be needed. The Greenest City Initiative and the Renewable City Action Plan have produced about more than 200 jobs in and of themselves. These plans in engineering, in planning, in what do they call them, sustainability teams. And all of those people are working union in-house in the city of Vancouver. None of that work is contracted out. So, I mean, it's been a good success story. I think Vancouver is a good example for other cities of how to put in place a plan to green the city and green their operations and become a model and do it through a labor lens and a social justice lens.
So thank you, Irene. I'm very, and it was actually a plot. I can admit it. It was a plot, but here we are. Yes. So just to say that that plot has actually turned into a cooperation between the global labor movement, including the International Transport Workers Federation, who are represented here, and their general secretary will be on stage tomorrow at GCAS, along with President Trumka, Hans Christian, Irene, many others. A cooperation between C40 cities and unions on just transition. So we hope that a year or two from now, if we're meeting again in some form or another, we'll have many other union leaders from cities around the world who will talk about the jobs targets that cities are setting as part of their climate targets, putting equal importance on creating high-road jobs, as we've heard about in California, and cutting emissions. Okay, Jeff. So I'm also pleased to welcome our last speaker. And by the way, I'm told we can stretch our time a little bit if people aren't too hungry, and maybe have time for some questions also for folks from the previous panel. So Jeff Johnson is the president of the Washington State Labor Council. He was elected in December 2010. And prior to joining the staff of the Washington State Labor Council in 1986, you had held a variety of senior roles as labor staff and also a shop steward for your staff unit, which is part of the Office of Office and Professional Employees International Union Local. Your work, Jeff, at the Washington State Labor Council has focused on legislation that improves the lives of working people through increasing collective bargaining and organizing rights, economic justice, anti-poverty measures, strengthening workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, and employment standards. Everything? No, I got this beautiful description.
No.
Okay.
My mother wrote that, so stop.
Are you feeling a little embarrassed? You should
Yes.
just enjoy the moment. Okay. So Jeff, what I personally and others really want to hear about is what we talked about last night. So that's Initiative 1631. So what are the key features? How did you help how did labor collectively help build the coalition for the initiative? Who had to be around the table?
Sam, thank you so much. First off, I just want to say that I'm both honored and humbled to be amongst such brilliant labor leaders and civil society leaders that are so dedicated to this work. So thank you for inviting me here. Labor in Washington State has been part of probably the deepest and broadest coalition I've been involved in my 40 years in the labor movement. And we co-wrote Initiative 1631, which is a clean energy, clean air, clean water initiative. We have 6 elements to the just transition piece of the initiative, but before I go through those, I want to make a couple prefatory kind of contextual comments. I was honored in 2015 to be part of the labor delegation to the Paris climate talks, and while I learned much there are 2 very important things I took out of it that were part of my education and lead me to where I am today. One is the briefings that Sharon Burrows did and her staff did every day, both at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, where I basically learned what just transition meant and quality jobs meant in so many forms from union leaders all across the world, as well as civil society leaders. The second most important thing I took away was actually an observation by a very young transit worker in downtown Paris. I went to one of the off-site talks given by Naomi Klein and Jeremy Corbyn, and there was a French transit worker named Clara who was supposed to give some observations afterwards, and she did the regular stuff. Oh, the speakers were brilliant, so on and so forth. But then she said something that I will never forget. She said, "If the planet were a bank, we would have already saved it." If the planet were a bank, we would have already saved it. So Clara, this young woman, kind of expressed the quintessential value statement of capitalism. It's okay to save bank profits and throw workers and communities and countries under the bus, right? To throw people into deep austerity. But to me, electricity went through my body when I heard her say that, right? And what I also think Clara did was she stated a clarion call for workers, unions, our community allies, and the climate justice movement, because of course the planet is more important than banks. But who gets to make the decisions about that planet or that country or that state or that province or that city is more important still. And that's where the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy that we're a part of wrestled with over the last 4 years to put this initiative together. So, starting from the premise of trying to leave no one and no community behind, we built 6 elements, and this is just the first step. I'm learning so much already just being here with what others are doing. But 6 elements of our just transition piece on this initiative that will go before the people of the state of Washington in November. It's on the ballot. The first was to make sure that we mitigated any energy cost increases for low-income individuals and families in the state of Washington. And that through energy assistance, through heating assistance, electricity assistance, by more investment in mass transit, so on and so forth. The second element was that we take the investment dollars from this. We put a carbon fee on carbon. We raise between $1 billion and $1.3 billion a year and invest that back into the clean energy economy. So of this investment money, we invest 35% into disproportionately impacted communities. So those communities, which oftentimes have the most low-income individuals, they get direct investments into clean energy, into their communities, providing jobs that historically they have not had the opportunity to take advantage of. And also later on, when the fossil fuel industry begins to dislocate workers, we can take that 35% directed investment and throw that into those communities as well. A third element was we wanted to create quality jobs. You know, a lot of the clean energy jobs we've seen in our own state are not necessarily good jobs, and we wanted to change that trend and not be passive. And so we built labor standards and procurement standards into the initiative so that in order to qualify for these grants, you've got to pay prevailing wages. You have to use both pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship utilization, right? You've got to have PLAs, community workforce agreements, and do local hire, okay? You cannot have violated any state or federal employment or labor standards. You can't have violated any OSHA or, in our state, WSHA health and safety standards. If you're a contractor and you are woman-owned, person of color-owned, or veteran-owned, you get preference. And we have buy clean standards for the materials used in, you know, in the infrastructure projects. The fourth element of our just transition piece was we wanted to protect current jobs, particularly in the energy-intensive, trade-exposed sectors of our economy. This is a backbone of our manufacturing in our state. So we're talking about cement, we're talking about steel, we're talking about aluminum. These are the industries that are most vulnerable to leakage, to moving their operations out of state or out of country. So both leaking jobs out of our state, but also leaking the pollution, right? When we did the analysis, it turns out that these industries only accounted for about 6 to 7% of the carbon emissions in our state. So they're not a big polluter. And they are the backbone of our manufacturing sector, and in fact, the sector that we're going to need to rebuild the climate-friendly infrastructure over time. So we wanted to protect them. But we didn't want to give them carte blanche. We didn't give them a free ride. We wrote into the initiative that there'll be a baseline, we'll draw a baseline on their carbon emissions, and then we need to take a look over time. They have to be reducing carbon emissions per unit of output over time. So they've got to be honest employers as well and work on making their processes more efficient and less carbon polluting. The fifth strain of the, or element of the just transition piece, and in some respects it's the most important one, and it's what I've been hearing other people speak about, and that is that labor, communities of color, tribes, and the environmental community become the key decision makers in who gets these grants if this initiative passes, so that we have an oversight board, a decision-making board. It has 15 members on it. The majority of seats are made up of communities of color, representatives of communities of color, tribes, labor, and the environment. We also have 3 subcommittees spelled out. One is the Clean Energy Fund. 70% of all funds collected go through the Clean Energy Fund. It's co-chaired by labor and a business community representative from Clean Energy. We have a Clean Water and Healthy Forest Fund. It's co-chaired by a tribal member and an environmentalist. The third committee is our Economic and Environmental Justice Committee. It's made up of 7 members, 3 from communities of color, 2 from tribes, 2 from labor. So decision-making ability there. The sixth and final part of our transition piece is transition support, and it starts with fossil fuel workers. If you are an older worker and within 5 years of receiving a union pension fund or Social Security, you get a glide path to retirement. Full wages, full health care contributions, full pension to receiving your pension. If you're an employee that has more than 1 year of service but less than 5, you get full wage replacement, health care contributions, and pensions for the amount of years you put in. If you put in 2 years, 2 years of wages, 2 years of health care contribution, 2 years of pension contributions. If you're a longer-term employee, meaning over 5 years of employment at the refinery, you get wage insurance in addition to the first set of benefits for up to 10, for years 6 through 10. So when you re-employ, if you're earning 80% of what you did before, the Just Transition Fund picks up the additional 20%, making you whole. All workers have the option of taking 2 years of full retraining benefits. That can be at a community and technical college. It can be through an apprenticeship program. It's pretty wide open. We employ peer counseling so that those workers that help you, assist you through this process, came out of your industry, have been dislocated themselves, so that you have a trusted messenger, going back to that word trust. They've been where you have been, and more easily to relate to. And then finally, we provide relocation expenses if you have to move. But the critical thing, and we start with refinery workers, fossil fuel workers, which also includes building and construction trade workers, right? So they're eligible for these benefits as well, though I think they will less likely be using them, because if we do this right, we're developing a fund for reinvesting in clean energy infrastructure, and so the transferable skills from building trades and refineries to building the things that we need in terms of infrastructure development. So anyway, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, so to practice a little democracy, I'm told that we can have about 10 minutes for questions if people want that, or if folks are desperate to get to the lunch, we could also do that. So what would you like? There's some burning questions to address to panelists, including the panelists we had up here before. Do I see any? Yes, see a couple hands going up. Okay, could I ask Sharon and Gil and Tom to come back to the panel? And I might have to give up my seat, but that's cool. Oh, there are. Okay. I wasn't sure if I could see over the podium. It was a problem. Okay, so who? Let's call him the sister. You can just ask it.
It's on the ballot this November. Yeah. And just so you know, the oil companies have put $12 million already into defeating it. We've raised $5.9 million. The latest polling, 63% of the people in our state are yes on passing the initiative, with 43% are hard yes. But we're going to face a barrage of negative publicity.
Okay.
50%.
Next question. Who's got the mic? Who's got the mic? I think I saw a hand over here. No? No, you only got one question, sorry. Okay. Sister.
Is there a mic or should I just shout?
Just shout. Use the union voice.
Yeah, the transition packages, I mean, recognizing that no worker wants to lose their job, the transition packages are, pretty, they add up to a lot of money. And I just wonder how you deal with other community stakeholders who feel like they've been sort of shut out of good jobs all along, or haven't reaped the benefits of these good jobs, or haven't had access to these good jobs. And that's also part of the transition, is kind of lifting everybody up. So how do you deal with that?
I'll try a real quick answer. So for us, what we did, we totally recognize that. That's why voice on the decision making, it was critical for us to make sure that those who have historically been left out and those who have done the least to cause carbon pollution but suffer the worst impacts have the greatest voice. It's why we made sure on that 15-member oversight committee, there's only one labor person, but there will be multiple tribal members, communities of color on there, and there's one environmental person. So they get a louder voice, a more substantive voice. Also, all the labor standards we bought that apply to these grants, with 35% of the investments going to disproportionately impacted communities, it opens up pre-apprenticeship programs, apprenticeship programs, prevailing wages to low-income individuals that, again, historically have been marginalized. It gives them an opportunity to move out of poverty and to rebuild their own community economies.
So I'd love to hear from Gil and Tom actually about that particular question, about the packages that workers got.
Yeah, it was, the question that you raised was raised almost immediately after we started talking about just transition for displaced coal workers, largely because our economy has for generations been a boom and bust economy. People are used to using their jobs, so people would come to our town halls and say, well, when I lost my job the last time the price of oil fell, no one swooped in and offered me a transition package. Why should we be offering that to coal workers who traditionally had the most stable jobs, even during the boom and bust? The utility workers and people working in the mines associated with those utilities, they're the ones that kept their jobs during the busts. So for us, it was really important to situate the just transition packages as part of a larger approach to economic development. Because if all we were talking about was support for those affected workers, the broader communities wouldn't have bought in. So that's why we, right from the beginning, opened up lines of communication with municipal leaders and community leaders to say that this is a community solution rather than a work site or industry solution. And so and that's still a work in progress, right? So our provincial government is still talking about a broader green energy strategy that would provide employment for other people. We're still negotiating with them on a procurement policy for public sector infrastructure that would provide jobs for others. But it's a work in progress, but it has been identified as an issue and a goal right from the beginning.
Okay, I think we lost Tom. I'm not seeing him on the panel. Okay, so question there. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for that question. In fact, on paper, that's what it says. It says that there's like a prospect of 1 million jobs, but in a true sense of the manner, the renewable energy sector only employs 150 workers, 150 workers. So we've not seen that, while the state utility, which is coal-powered, employs about 48,000 workers. So you can see that it's even less than a fraction. I don't even know what to call it, like in terms of percentage-wise. So we really could use like the international community to assist us in addressing those concerns, because it is the problem that is being brought to South Africa by the multinationals with the help of government, as I have said before. But one of the things that we've also suggested as a union, so that this becomes an inclusive issue, it doesn't only become about the workers that are already employed. That's why we are calling it a socially owned renewable energy, because democratization of this energy sector would mean a lot for the whole of South Africa and the entire population of South Africa. And one of the missed opportunities in this proposed sector is that RE, as part of the larger effort towards energy democratization, has not found a way of helping women address inequality. And that's also one of the issues that we thought that would be very important if we are to move forward and to gain momentum in moving forward. But it has started, it's moving, but we do need support, of course.
Great, thank you, sister.
A question for the brother from Norway, because I like the Norwegian accent. I'm curious about this notion of trust, and how you've sustained it over the last 50 years or 60 years. We used to have a thing called a social compact in the U.S., where there was an understanding that the worker would help the employer make money, and the employer would make sure the worker got paid a fair wage. That ended in the 60s or so with corporate greed. So why has corporate greed not interfered with this lasting concept of trust?
That is a very good question, and one question we are very aware of in Norway, because I don't know how much you follow Swedish elections over here, but they had an election on Sunday, very close. And there is, I think, when we're talking about just transition, I would like to put it in a bigger context. I come back to the trust, because just transition, when you talk to Norwegian employees, it's about, you know, giving the trust and the security that, well, your job might be gone, but there is a security net there in the welfare state to take care of you if you lose your job, if you get sick, or for instance, and that we have measures to reskill you, to make you able to go into new kind of works. That kind of trust is important. And for the Norwegian trade union movement now, we have a conservative government in Norway at the moment. And they have, you know, changed the tax system to benefit the, you know, for the capitalists, and this you know, builds down trust, because differences in society is increasing. You know, in Norwegian scale a lot, but you know, globally not so much perhaps. But nevertheless, the same thing we saw in Sweden after the financial crisis in 2008 and the conservative government coming in. You know, Sweden was one of the countries where differences between people increased the most in the Western Europe. And combine that with migration and, you know, refugee crisis, well, you see the increase of the extreme right rising. The same thing can you see in Britain when it comes to Brexit. You see it in different European elections when it comes to Austria, Hungary, you know, Italy. All these kind of countries where you don't have that kind of trust, you see the increase of the extreme right. So what we really emphasize, together with the employees, the employers organization, is that trust is the glue, that's the gold of the Norwegian model that we really need to take care of. And in order to do that, you can't let economic differences grow. You can't have a taxation system that, you know, lacks trust. You can't, you know, fiddle with the system in a way that, you know, makes the trust go down. So this is one of the big things that we, you know, the debate in Norway is all about, because I think all of the Norwegians really wants to maintain that level of trust. And in order to do that, Sam, we need to get another government in the next election.
So we have one more comment.
Yeah, just
from Gil.
to this question about trust. You know, Canada's in a unique position. We are physically neighbors with the United States, but in many ways we're in between the United States and Europe when it comes to our politics and our institutions. But with, you know, like, with due respect to the brother from Norway, I would suggest that based on our experience in Canada, where we've swung between right-wing governments and more progressive governments, trust isn't enough. What you need are institutions and legal frameworks that can be used to address big social issues. And obviously the big social issue that's in front of us, the one we're talking about, is how, as a labor movement and indeed as a planet, how we deal with climate change. And I think that what they have in Norway is the holy grail. I think that the only way that we can effectively deal with these big challenges, especially in the time frame that we have, the very limited time frame, is we have to be able to move societies very quickly. And that model tripartitism is the best model forward. But I think, you know, like I'm a little bit of a student of history, and I got to say that we had a little bit of tripartitism in Canada after the end of the Second World War. I've looked at some of the models in Europe. Those things didn't just fall out of the sky. They didn't, you know, they weren't just because they were good neighbors with each other. They were those institutions that allow Norway to and the other Nordic countries to deal with these issues more effectively. They were deliberately constructed, and all the work that we do as activists and leaders takes place within these social constructs. So, you know, one of the first things that we have to do is talk about politics, to talk about structures. You know, I would actually suggest that for my country, Canada, and I would respectfully suggest that in the United States, the priority should be, you know, we got to deal with climate change, but in order to do it, we have to help create structures that allow that to do it. And so that means, you know, frameworks of labor law that create worker power, legal frameworks that give recognition to community interests and different, you know, ethnic groups, you know, that give voice to the voiceless, power to the marginalized. You know, if we want to deal with these things, we got to create structures that allow us to deal with them.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the discussion is really and truly over. I'm afraid of Carol. She's giving me the cutoff sign. Thank you very much, and thanks very much to the sisters, brothers, and comrades on the panel, and also for your leadership in the labor movement.